Uh, my name is Tom Anstey, and this is my news report on contemporary issues in sport. This report will cover 4 different contemporary issues, which are deviance, racism, sexism, and child protection. So the first contemporary issue is deviance. Deviant behaviour is a recognised violation of social norms, which is seen in 4 different categories. These categories are hooliganism, violence, cheating, and drug taking. There are 3 types of deviance in sport. Positive deviance, which is breaking the rules without the intent to harm. Negative deviance, which is breaking the rules with the intent on harming another player or athlete. And gamesmanship, which is not officially breaking any rules, but using set tactics to gain an upper hand. Hooliganism is a violent or rowdy behaviour between fans and is very common in football. Each team tends to have a football firm, which is almost like a gang of fans. This can have big impacts on the athletes as well as the spectators. Firstly, because it can be very intimidating for both athletes and spectators to go to another club where they have a big firm or hooligan gang. An example of this would be Millwall Football Club. They have had a few cases where hooligans have affected players. There have been some big cases, such as when Raheem Sterling was attacked by a group of fans in a car park after a game, or even when recently he was racially abused by Chelsea fans in the game the other week. This would have affected him in later matches as well, because he could be more conscious of other fans, and this could take his focus off his game. Violence and verbal abuse is another act of deviance. There are a lot of examples of this happening between players as well as between fans. A couple of examples of violence would be the Zidane headbutt in the World Cup final, Eric Cantona when he karate kicked a Crystal Palace fan, and there's a lot more examples as well. The Cantona incident was an act of frustration at being sent off, which negatively impacts the sport as it turns football into not only an ugly game, but it makes it less enjoyable for spectators to watch, as players will be abusing each other. It also impacts the clubs who the players represent. Cantona, as an example, would have reflected badly on the rest of the team, the manager, and the club as a whole, mainly because he represents that club week in, week out. The next contemporary issue, or the next category under deviance, is cheating. This is seen in many forms such as diving, doping, and match fixing. Examples are commonly seen for diving when a striker is running for a 50-50 with the goalkeeper. Suarez does this a lot in his games, the same as Dele Alli. They'll take a big touch to draw the goalkeeper out, and then they'll almost anticipate contacts to go into the keeper, dive over, make it look like they were fouled. This leads to obviously their team being awarded a penalty and possibly a sending off, which gives them a massive upper hand over the other team, because not only do they have the chance to score, they'll then have a worse keeper in goal. This has also been seen in other sports. An example would be rugby, when Tom Williams used a blood cap to make it look like someone had hit him and get the other player sent off. This obviously gives the team an upper hand as they have more players and they're more likely to score points because they can exploit more gaps. This would negatively impact the sport. More and more players are trying to cheat to gain the upper hand on their opponents. It can be a positive for the team who's trying to cheat, because obviously the officials might be unsure and give them more decisions. However, if they're caught cheating a lot, they can be fined, banned, and it can actually lead to officials giving less decisions their way because they'll believe they'll be cheating. This is seen quite a lot in football when players who normally dive are actually fouled and the referee won't give any decisions their way. Drug taking is another part of deviance which negatively impacts football. Some players take performance-enhancing drugs in the form of steroids. 2 players who were both tested positive for this was Jaap Stam and Edgar Davids. But There are a lot of other players in the sport, like Maradona, who have been tested for illegal substances such as cocaine. Um, this could affect the other players because they might not have an advantage because they don't take these steroids. But it's also unfair on the clean players in the team who don't take drugs because they won't have the same muscular strength or muscular endurance as the other players who are taking these performance enhancing drugs, which could ultimately lead to them losing the match. Child protection is very important in football and is another big contemporary issue. As there are now lots of roles such as psychologists, analysts and scouts who all have contacts with kids, they have a lot of control over potentially their career, and it's important that they have the right recruitment to get in the right players. Each person who is hired for these roles will have to have a criminal record check to make sure the people they recruit are trustworthy and have no criminal record. If the correct procedures are not carried out, then this creates a bigger chance of risk for the child, as they could be under more danger. Supervision is key when coaching, because if there's an accident, then there's more people to help. It also reduces the chance of an accident because you'll get people checking for more things. One of these things could be the right footwear, something like that, just making sure that everyone is wearing the right sort of kit. It just reduces the chance of anything happening. This has a big impact on the kids playing because they feel they're in a safer environment. They're able to express themselves and progress more. With supervision of an older coach, you'll also be able to get more experience from them, which ultimately can lead you to deliver better sessions to the kids, which will benefit their performance. Bentley et al. States that over 49,000 children in England are identified as needing protection from abuse. If the correct procedures have been followed, then this should not be an issue, but obviously if they're not, then there'll be big legal issues for the club. Barry Bennell is an example of someone who did not follow the correct procedures. He has been dubbed as sheer evil, as being sentenced to 30 years in prison. He was a football scout who sexually abused players he was recruiting, and there were complaints from over 100 players about Bennell, and one of them stated he left a trail of psychological devastation. This statement shows just how big of an effect he had on their lives and how incorrect safeguarding can lead to this devastation, and it will psychologically affect them throughout their life. Future generations can be affected as well, because if the correct procedures aren't followed out, then the kids might be growing up thinking that this is right. This can then lead to them not following correct procedures in the future as well. It can also give the club a very bad name, as they are the people who hired Barry Bennell. The FA are now doing a lot more to reduce the chances of this happening again, as they've begun internal reviews led by Clive Sheldon, and the review will look at what information the FA were aware of at the time. BBC's Victoria Derbyshire programme reported that the FA scrapped a major review of its child protection policies in 2003. This hints that the FA were not following the correct procedures but didn't want anyone to know, so they covered it up. Racism is another contemporary issue in football. This is holding a biased or unfair view about other nationalities or ethnicities and treating them inferiorly. This has affected football because it's very common for racism to occur, which again just makes the sport look ugly when it's meant to be called the beautiful game. The first example of when this is seen is when fans have thrown food, in particular bananas, at Dani Alves. He actually managed to take this quite well and just ate the bananas as a bit of a joke, but this shows how different footballers deal with it in different ways, by trying to make the fans look stupid instead of letting it affect their performance. An example of when this has majorly affected a player would be Mario Balotelli when he was playing for AC Milan in Italy. He was being tormented by the opposition fans as they were making monkey noises and chants about him because of his race. Not only would this affect his concentration, it can also make players want to stop playing. The FA is now coming up with new campaigns, such as the Kick It Out campaign. All of these campaigns have been set up just to try and reduce racism with football and create bans or fines for anyone who is being racist. There have also been examples of racism between players, and an example of this would be Evra and Luis Suarez. Suarez was racist towards Evra and then didn't shake his hand before a match, which caused quite a big spark between the two. When football, before it really changed into the modern game, there used to not be many black players, whereas now a third of all footballers are black. There was a programme called White versus Blacks, How Football Changed the Nation, which shows the changes from before to now. They would used to play a whites versus blacks match where all of the black players would often be racially abused. There weren't many black players in a lot of the teams, whereas obviously now there's a third of all black players. Back then it was probably about 1 in every 10 teams. They were just told by their coaches and other players to ignore it. These chants were being organised by a national front who were spread out amongst the fans to start racist chants where other fans would join in. This would make the players feel isolated on the pitch, because other players would just stand by and laugh. Even players on the same side would just stand by and not really do anything, which would make them feel even more isolated because even their teammates aren't sticking up for them. This is a very negative impact on football because it is isolating and segregating players and fans from each other. This impacts how all the players feel during the game. They won't be comfortable with playing, and it can also affect the amount of spectators that turn up to each game. Sully Montari, who's a Ghanaian midfielder, says that FIFA aren't taking racism seriously enough. In one of his matches, he claims he was racially abused and walked off the pitch. This resulted in him having a 1-match ban, as he's not allowed to walk off the pitch without the referee saying so. But it just shows how racism has affected this player alone and the sport in a negative way, because they're getting banned for sticking up for something that they believe is wrong. He actually got sent off because he had booking for dissent already, and then walking off the pitch resulted in a second yellow. Sexism is the last contemporary issue. It is a massive issue that needs improving. In football, there have been quite big improvements with equality between the two sexes. For example, the Women's Super League was created in 2011, where 11 teams played in the same league. In 2014, this was later changed to 2 divisions, so it is similar to the men's where they had the league system. But even just the fact that there's 2 leagues alone compared to the male 4 leagues shows how big of a gap there is already. Man City Women's are the first team to average over 2,000 spectators per game. This is stated by BBC Sport in an article, whereas this is a massive contrast to Man City men's team, where they average 45,000 at minimum per game. This shows just how different the attendance is between each game and how sexism is a contemporary issue in football. Ben Rumsby states that 7% of female footballers have been victims of sexual harassment, and over 60% of female footballers have experienced sexist banter. This is 2/3 of the female footballer population that have experienced sexist jokes, whereas in the male game, you'd very rarely see it. This creates a negative atmosphere in female football. They'll feel like they're always being judged or possibly harassed for playing the sport that they enjoy and trying to make a living. The main difference between male and female football is the wage gap. It's like comparing 2 different sports like rugby and football, because only the top players in the female league get paid up to £30,000 per year, which is only 10% of what top male footballers make in a week. This wage gap shows just how much football has to work on before the 2 are equal. and the wages become the same. Sport England are doing quite a lot to try and improve the equality between men and women by promoting more campaigns to get women active. So the This Girl Can campaign is a really big campaign carried out by them just to try and get people active. They also carry out active people surveys, where in 2016 they found out the number of people participating in a sport had increased by 250,000, where sports like swimming saw an increase of 11,000 participants. When talking with a few students about contemporary issues, they stated different views. So Ben, who's a basketball player, when asked about equality and sexism, he said, "You see a lot of inequality throughout sports still. You can even see from the recent Ballon d'Or ceremony where the host was sexist towards Ega Hegerberg. This is such a big shock where she has just won the first female Ballon d'Or, and she's been, she's had sexist banter with the host." He says, "I do believe equality is improving in sports like football, where they are getting similar opportunities to make it professional, even if their pay is a lot less." I then spoke to Madison, who's a female footballer, and got her views on the same situation. She says, "I think that there are still very high levels of sexism across all sports, but it has definitely improved from before." When I asked her to go into further detail about this, she mentioned tennis player Serena Williams, and then went on to talk about managerial and officiating roles. I asked, if you had a male and a female referee for your match, both with the same qualifications, who would you choose? She replied she picked the female official, as she believes they have more control over her matches as she plays female football. From personal experience, male officials haven't been able to keep control of the game, but female officials seem to have more control over the players.